Today is Wednesday, August 24th, 2022. I've just done a 1-star synchronization to Arcturus, and yes, can't be seen on the screen amazingly, but it could be seen through the finder scope. The parameters associated with the model are quite good. In fact, when I oriented to Arcturus using GoTo and then walked away for a while because I couldn't initially see it, I got back and I believe it was within about 2 arc minutes of the very center of the finder scope. Now, when you do an alignment, you get both values for error for both the eastern and western hemispheres of the sky, because the equatorial mount does an equatorial flip. Current values are the best I've ever seen. Not sure if you can see them on the screen. I'll try to orient it. The Ori-hour index error is minus 630. The deck index error is minus 3183. The polar axis azimuth is 1643. Polar axis elevation is 218. So that basically means, I believe, in an idealized version of the model, all those values would be 0. And then when you say go to, and you reload the model the very next day, everything would be 0, and the bright star that you oriented towards would be right in the middle of the center of the field of view. Those are the best values I've had in a while, and I'll explain how I got to them. If I switch to the Eastern active model, you get an Ori-hour index error of 144, deck index error of 1095, polar axis azimuth minus 1383, polar axis elevation positive 406. Now, in both the east and west, the amount of non-perpendicularity is 0 on 2 axes, and there's never really been any counterweight flexure because I pay attention to that when I set these things up. So there's our values. Now, how I actually accomplished this was twofold. About a week ago, I had to actually literally go back, and I realized that I had misinterpreted the longitude and latitude of John Day, Oregon. And when I did that, I translated it wrong because it was in hundredths of a degree, not in arc minutes. So when I realized that fundamental problem, I had to go back and redo the time, the longitude, latitude, and perfected the time and date values. When I did that, I still had a lot of trouble getting good star alignment modeling. But what I did last night is I gave up on going between 2 stars, and I just oriented to either Arcturus to the west or to Altair to the east, and I adjusted the HA mechanical adjust and the declination adjust so that Altair after Arcturus was right at the center of the field of view when you came out of the park position and drove towards those particular stars. That's how I got such reasonably good values. And then when I went and checked them against Noonki to the south and Deneb to the north and the east, I found that both those stars were very close to the alignments that were set up. And then I just needed to make small adjustments in both of their positions in the model. And from that point on, I was really getting good go-to accuracy. So hopefully tonight that will also be the case. Also last night I played with picture adjust. I'm going to see if I can navigate to it by pressing the buttons. Always a lot of fun to have to do when I'm doing it with the actual buttons. So if we go down, if we go back all the way to the top level menu, you'll see there's a picture adjust. Now, for the life of me, I was not able to pick up NGC, the Crescent Nebula 6888 in Cygnus at all. And I wasn't getting any kind of look at the Eagle Nebula. So I decided to play with the brightness, contrast, and sharpness values in the picture adjust without necessarily making any kind of change in the exposure time and gain or sensitivity of the CCD. These are the values I've currently arrived at. There we go, now you can see them. And what they did is they allowed me to get to see Crescent Nebula and the Eagle Nebula, but there was a cost. And the cost was more bloated stellar images. Now, unfortunately last night, I had also installed a Lumicon dark sky filter into 1/4 inch diagonal right about there. But in putting it back in, for some reason, the focus was off. So today what I did is I oriented the telescope to the hillside that you see over there, and I perfected the focus using coarse and fine adjustments on the OTA assembly visual back. Now, I'm hoping that without having to make any more adjustments in the picture adjust, and by leaving the AGC at 36 and the exposure time at 128 FLD, I will get a good compromise between the aesthetics of stars and the presence of bright nebula, and most importantly galaxies, of which there are very few to make out in the summer sky, except I discovered a number of 12th to 14th magnitude galaxies in Lyra and a couple in Hercules. Unfortunately, you see that roof up there? It tends to block the view of all those sets of galaxies. So I may have to wait until Pegasus is in a good sky position before I will start to get some really decent views of distant galaxies. Because the preponderance of all the deep sky studies, probably 95% of the NGCs are galaxies. And they do deserve to be as spectacularly imaged as possible. Right now, I would just be happy if I could even detect the presence of the cores with some extensions on the display screen you're seeing before you now. That would be a good start, but it's going to take a lot of massaging. All right, so now I'm waiting for the sky to dark. So this evening I'm going to start off with a shutter speed of 128 flood and a CCD gain controller sensitivity of 36 decibels. And if we can make that out right there. Still not quite sky dark. First thing I want to point out is the amount of spurious pixels being fired by the CCD imager. It's possible it's actually in the TFT monitor, but these all are just tiny points corresponding to probably a single pixel on the imager, and create spurious star images that have to be discounted when you're looking at the images that are generated. I'll show you something else. For some reason this thing decided to switch to Chinese, I believe. That value 10 is pretty seriously low for illumination of the screen. There is another value, which is the contrast value. I've reduced them both seriously because, one, if you run the contrast too high, you start to see a texture forming on the screen. You see that? Yeah, it looks like snow falling. All right, so I'm going to start off the evening on my viewing with the contrast on the screen as low as possible, even though I boosted the contrast from the CCD imager. And the same thing for the brightness. Run it down as much as possible because it gets terrible banding, and I'm hoping this will help prevent the banding problem that you see on the images. So 1010 is where I'm going to start. I may have to jack it up. Discovered a rather unexpected phenomena. If for any reason you expose the CCD imager to a vast amount of light, apparently the pixels, the CCD pixels on the camera get overwhelmed, and they persistently put out light onto every pixel of the screen. So what I had to do is I had to go back in once the sky got dark, and I had to reset my shutter speed, run it all the way back so it made a dark screen to reset the CCD receptors, and I have to reinitialize again to go back up to my standardized shutter speed. So something to note for the future. It had to be completely reset. You do not want to expose your CCD imager to an overwhelming amount of light, or the screen will persistently remain white and you'll see nothing but snow. Okay, here's a little experiment. We're going to watch the effect of screen brightening on M13 before sky dark. You can barely see it there right now. As you can see, I'm going to head up to about 50% screen brightness. Now, another thing to notice about this, you see those little pseudo false stars on the screen? They didn't get any brighter, which suggests to me that they may be actual artifacts of the screen and not the CCD imager. I have to explore this further. Play the same game with contrast in a second. Okay, so if I punch this button twice, get the contrast function on the screen. Now let's watch how this develops. It doesn't seem to have quite as much effect as the screen brightness. So let's run it back down a ways. Set it at 25%, right there. Let it dissipate. So far, just a blur for the globular cluster M13 in Hercules. Before I began the night session, I knew that focus was going to be a principal concern. So I focused on about a hillside of about a mile away using the imager, and the image never came to focus when I actually turned it on stars. So I had to experiment with focus by turning it, well, a half turn each direction on the fine adjustment. Here's the resulting view of M13 in Hercules, which was my initial comparo study for the evening before I went on to other studies. This is pretty good. This is with the filter. It's being done at 128 flood, which is about 1.5 seconds exposure times, and 36 decibels of gain, which is about 1/2 magnitude of gain, less than the maximum gain you can get. This is with a dark sky filter, and it is currently set up in terms of the screen, because I played with that as well, as 25% on brightness and 50% on contrast. And the result isn't all that bad, although you'll notice pushing the buttons on the monitor deflected the telescope a little bit and we lost some resolution. So here we have a good starting point. M22, it's not quite sky dark, but remember my goal for the evening is to try to turn up at least one galaxy of known magnitude so I can start baselining that for further studies. But boy, that is a very nice view of M13 with the filter in place. 128 flood, 36 gain, and adjustments made to contrast and brightness that I showed earlier on the screen for the actual CCD imager itself. Pretty spectacular. Playing with settings has really helped. There's a 11.6 magnitude galaxy, maybe 3 by 1.5 arc minutes, within about a full moon's distance of M13, 6207. I have had no luck imaging it in the past, but with the Lumicon Deep Sky filter, changes to exposure time, and the adjustments to internal contrast to the CCD imager. This is our view of the galaxy. You can see very nicely it's got a bright central core with two spiral extensions going up to the 1 o'clock and the 7 o'clock positions. I am impressed by that. 11.6 magnitudes. Now my hope is, since we can see stars to magnitude 15.5, that we should be able to actually image at least the core of 14th magnitude galaxies. Now that's a very difficult thing to prove because the core often looks like a star itself. So whenever you get this nebulous extensions, you know you've actually imaged a galaxy. So let it go for the record, this is the first galaxy that I've been able to image with the CCD imager, and I think I'm getting a slightly better result than I ever have through a 6-inch telescope. This galaxy is virtually on the zenith, and the sky is now dark enough for imaging. So kudos to the system for revealing this, but sure took a lot of adjustments to make it possible. Also in Hercules is galaxy 6166, magnitude 11.8, slightly less long and a little bit wider. This is a 450 million light-year distant galaxy. Looks like it's an elliptical, and magnitude 11.8, so it's just a little fainter. And there you can see it on the screen. And it may have neighbors. I suspect this is a galaxy group with the brightest member. Probably gives you the best contrast view right there, and it probably gives you the best aesthetic view right about there. This one will be pushing the upper limits. 6158 galaxy in Hercules, magnitude 13.7. Just pretty much a 1 by 1 arc-minute galaxy, 390 million light-years distance. I don't like that declination though. I think we're going to be blocked by the roof, but let's give it a shot. It didn't move far. What we're seeing now is a residual image, I think, from the previous. Oh, whoa. This is a galaxy group. So we really did not get any tracking. You can see there's galaxies there, there's another galaxy there, there's a galaxy there, there may be another one right about there. I know you may not have seen it on the screen because of contrast issues with the handheld camera, but I'll sweep it a little bit. So yes, this is a galaxy group in Hercules. And I may be partially blocked by the roof, I can't tell. But if that's a galaxy group and we picked up 4 or 5 galaxies, I would have to say, with these settings and the Illumicon sky filter, we are actually getting a pretty good view, except for all the faint pixelation that's coming with high contrast on the screen. But at least we know we can now go deep. Sweep it one more time. Boy, this is a surprise. This is galaxy NGC 6041A, must be part of a galaxy group, in Hercules, magnitude 13.7, a little over 1 arc-minute in size. It's a spiral of type B, 450 million light-years distant. This guy's probably got a pretty decent intrinsic brightness. I have to characterize galaxies a little more to get a better sense of distance and luminosity size relationships. The scope should really swing south with this view. And it is. The concern is whether or not it can actually peer past the observatory roof. So let's watch and see if anything. Well, there is a star. It's going to take, like I said, about 1.5 times 6, 9 seconds to actually assemble the screen in depth. And I'm already beginning to notice some faint smudgies on there, which could be the galaxies themselves. About the right size too. Now the question then becomes, will they turn up on this handheld camera? Let me sweep over it. And that'll have to wait until I can review the images, because the display screen on this is pretty small. Our next galaxy is NGC 6052, also in Hercules. It's also considered 6064, so it was reproduced. Magnitude roughly 13, very small, less than an arc minute, 217 million light years distant, and to the south, so we shouldn't have any issues here. Now watch the screen generate. Star streaks. Fixed stars, lots of faint nebulosities visible on the screen, lots, as well as, of course, the faint pixelation that comes out of using high contrast. Clearly, this is a galaxy group, and we are seeing them magnitude 13. I've never seen magnitude 13 galaxies at the eyepiece. I think magnitude 12 on a 6-inch scope is about your limit under the best conditions, unless you really have some superb seeing conditions, high mountains, etc., etc. But there's definitely galaxies right here with a bright central core, and then there's several others peppered all around the screen. Hopefully, once again, the handheld camera will manage to image them. I suspect that many of the other galaxies that I'll be pointing the scope at will be part of this as well. Continuing our galaxy quest in Hercules, this is a fairly bright one, magnitude 11.9 and large, 2.5 by 1.1 arc minutes. It's a spiral, it's turned away from us. It's 107 million light years distant at 19 degrees declination, which means no problem with the roof on the scope. Not much. Ooh, we are getting some serious movement. This too may be part of another galaxy group. Now remember, JLE Dreyer had to map all of the, oh yeah, I'm seeing several galaxies there. JLE Dreyer had to map all these out and give them coordinates. That'll, right there, that spiral with a bright central core is very, very present. Once again, about a magnitude 11.5, quite large. That's probably the most present galaxy I've seen so far. So I'm going to sweep up and down. There are several other smudgies on the screen, which are presumably galaxies as well. Wow, very nice. And the star images aren't bad. They aren't too bloated. Very good. Once again, takes this image, second and a half, oh, nice central core on that galaxy. Second and a half times 6 or 9 seconds to fully assemble itself based on 6 iterations of 1.5 seconds each. Plus I'm using the Lumicon Deep Sky filter to get rid of some sky glow. And I've also boosted the contrast really high. By the time I end this though, I'm going to try to play with the contrast a little bit so I can get rid of this pixelation that I'm seeing. Okay, this next one, if we see it at all, will blow me away. It's magnitude 14.4. It's a type spiral, a B-type spiral. Looks like it has a ring in it. Almost half a billion light years, 454 million light years distance. Fortunately, it's at plus 27 degrees. We should be able to get a look at it. And let's see if anything turns up. Go ahead, boy. Go for it. As you see, 6181. Okay. We get to watch the old image dissolve on the screen and the new images appear. Definitely do not want to mistake the ghost of the last galaxy that's on the screen for the one that we want to see. Let it dissipate. Once again, it takes about 9 seconds to regenerate the screen, and while it's regenerating, I have to be very still to make sure that I don't deflect the mount. If I deflect the mount at all, you're going to see little comet tails and everything. I have to say this, I'm going to count to 9. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009. Yes, indeed, those faint glows are galaxies. And I see a multiplicity of galaxies on the screen. I do believe this is another galaxy cluster. The brightest one is off to the right. There. And there are several fainter ones. I am astonished. So we must be seeing 14th magnitude and fainter galaxies right now on the screen. The only disconcerting aspect is the pixelation of the screen. But, you know, in looking at the sky tonight, there's a lot of water vapor up there. And that water vapor seems to present the same kind of pixelation as I'm seeing right now on the screen. But I don't think there's really any correlation. I'm also seeing quite a few double stars up there in the left-hand quadrant. Yes, indeed. I am very impressed now. Oh, look at the bright core in that one galaxy down here in the corner. All right, Galaxy Quest is on. Okay, there are in fact 3 galaxies, 62, 63, 64, and 65. 63 is magnitude 13.7, almost an arc minute in size, 461 million light years distant, according to the database here, 27 degrees north. Should be right, hardly any motion here. All right. I saw the star trail there a little bit when I looked up, so we saw it shift a little bit. Again, there's a multiplicity of smudgies. Now those smudgies are interesting. They're probably all galaxies, part of the galaxy group, many of which were missed by J.L.E. Dreyer when he categorized, because he was looking optically, I believe, in the 1880s through a telescope. He may have had photography at the time, but I doubt it. I have to look into that. But there are a multiplicity of galaxies, and I'm seeing one right in the middle of the screen, which is probably the one that just got centered on because the alignment is pretty good, and I've been synchronizing it, with a bright central core and some flaring vertically to the 12 and 6 o'clock positions. There are other ones there, so we now know that we're seeing galaxies down to about magnitude 13.5 and fainter. Once again, something I would expect from a 12-inch scope, not a 6. So I'm very happy with the performance, but I did have to really boost the exposure time to 128 flood, and I had to add a Lumicon deep sky filter to be able to review these, plus really pushing the contrast and the brightness up of the screen. I think there's one more in this group. Let's see if it shifts. Okay, 6265 is part of that cluster. Magnitude 14.2, less than half an arc minute in width and 0.8 arc minutes in size, 433 million light years distant. This should be very close. So what we're going to do is I'm going to press GoTo, and you're going to watch the screen shift. Watch the trail on the bright star. I didn't see it shift. I looked down. Once again, I'm seeing a multiplicity of galaxies. There's actually 2 or 3 right near the center of the screen. I think I can even see them on the handheld. I properly shade the contrast with the camera as I sweep it. So this is a very ripe area, and now, even though I really had to push the settings, and I have to use the Lumicon Deep Sky filter, I am now seriously impressed with the galactic reach of the 6-inch scope when using the Revolution 2 imager. Problem, resolution's not that good, and there's lots of tiny pixels due to sensitivity issues on the screen. What I could do now is just try to drop the contrast down a little bit and see if I could still see those brighter galaxies, especially now that I know it has 14 magnitude galaxy reach. Okay, I just ran things down a little bit. Although the galaxy is still, this one galaxy here is still present, roughly 13, so is the insect. I'm getting a better view in terms of stars, contrast, and the flecking on the screen. Let's take a look at where I ended up. 10 on brightness, 23 on contrast. We probably want to run the contrast up to 30. All right, that looks pretty good. And let's, well, 50%. Okay, let's go back to this. 10% on brightness, 30% on contrast, if that's what that means. So I think I'll leave it here for a little bit. Let's watch the screen regenerate. And aesthetically, it's not too annoying with the pixelation in the image. In fact, it looks rather antiquated. We have this kind of pixelation in early images of the deep sky from telescopes, when they hyped up the contrast and magnitudinal reach by over-processing the film. At Mount Wilson, for instance. Okay, let's start with this. Once again, here's the settings. 10% on the brightness, 30% on the contrast. And I have finished Galaxy Quest and Hercules for the night. Carpe Noctem. Here's a bit of a baseline that I like to use. This is NGC 6888. I've videoed it several times under various settings and conditions. It's called the Crescent Nebula. This part here, I usually look for to make sure I can see it. I've seen like this brightest area in the eyepiece of a 6-inch scope. But if you follow the crescent right along, you'll see there's this extension over here and little nebulosity there. I have not seen that before. I am very impressed with these settings. It does take a while for the stars to stabilize. They're not as bloated as I expected, especially using a nebula filter. Now, this is a superb baseline. The other one to use is the Eagle Nebula. If you can turn up the Eagle in the Eagle Nebula, it's a dark region that looks kind of like an eagle in profile. You know that you're getting a pretty good view of the Eagle Nebula. I am really impressed with this, and I am going to recapture it for my records here in a second. So for the record, this is NGC 6888, a nebula in Cygnus, otherwise known as the Crescent. It's magnitude 10, but spread out over a 20 by 10 arc-minute region, which means it's probably typically instantaneously in the magnitude 13 or 14 range. 4,800 light years distant. It's well north. It's approximating culmination right now. The sky's got a little bit of atmospheric haze in it, but I'm using a Lumicon filter to help filter out the light that's being reflected back from the city of John Day into the telescope. Anyway, the view is this. As I articulated earlier, I have seen in the eyepiece a little nebulosity in a 6-inch scope here under the best conditions. And I have imaged previously this sweep of the crescent in this location here. Now I'm actually seeing some extensions, brightened areas all the way up to the right here, making it like almost a full crescent or bow and arrow. I am very impressed with this image. I'll sweep the screen a little bit because I'm not sure if the handheld is actually revealing what I want it to reveal. But I think looking at the handheld screen, that's giving you about the best image of the entirety of it, even though there's a bright area at the bottom of the screen is showing. So, wow. Now look at the stars. They're not nearly as bloated as expected. Very, very nice. Okay, an even more obvious and spectacular showpiece is M27 the Dumbbell Planetarium Vulpecula. 8 arc minutes by 5.6, so about half the size of the Crescent. It's only 1,300 light years distant. It has a bright central star. I'm going to go to that now so we can wrap on comparisons. These are the same settings as were used on the galaxies earlier, where we were seeing galaxies certainly down to magnitude 13.5 with some elements of detail and features. I'm seeing the ghost image as the dumbbell forms of the crescent on the screen. There's probably quite a few ghost stars up there as well. We need to give it a chance to fully formulate. Now, one of the things I always look for in the dumbbell is that frontier. It's got a remarkable expansionary frontier to it. This is probably the best view in the handheld camera. Now remember, I have to use when I'm holding the handheld camera, the telescope's at different points of view and perspectives. I'm not always sure that what I'm seeing on the screen is what you're seeing in this image. But right now, looking at both, boy, that is a fairly intense representation of the dumbbell. The question now becomes, for future reference, can I start to add color? And so that's something I'm going to want to experiment with, and I may actually try it before I carpe noctem off the evening with the dumbbell, because there is a color setting on the imager. So by changing the day-night setting from night to day, night basically is telling it just to do black and white or higher image resolution. This is the day setting, and you'll notice right now we have a distinct cast of green to the nebulosity, but we haven't lost anything in terms of image quality. What I have to do now is perhaps play with the color balance, and there's a thing called white balance user 2, but I have no idea what color the dumbbell nebula really is. I think I'll just leave it on day for the time being and try to get a sense, make some adjustments to the HLC, BLC, for instance, some of these other things, to see if they can give us variation in color rather than simply looking greenish all over the screen. So this is where I left it at user 2 with the day setting. I discovered by cycling through that I could change it to user 1. Give it a few seconds to see if that adjusts anything. Yep, went purple on us, didn't it? I can go to push. I think it's kind of more of a red there. Go to ATW. Seeing a little more color variation in ATW. Push lock. Not noticing anything there. Manual, which means I would have to play with it. I don't want to do that. So if we go back to user 2, user 1 is kind of greenish. Push makes it a little more purple, which is probably more likely color. ATW adds a little more color variation. I think I'll leave it at that for the time being and save out. Return. Exit. Save. And let's give it a chance to regenerate the color, and I'll come right back to the dumbbell in a second. So This is going to be our Carpe Noctem moment. Here we're seeing M27 the Dumbbell Nebula. We're seeing that very delineate frontier to the 2 and 8 o'clock position, 2:30 to 7:30 positions. We're seeing a sort of a purplish cast to it. We're seeing an almost complete circularity to the frontier, which is quite astonishing. We're seeing the central star, we're seeing regions of texture throughout it in terms of nebulosity. But just to remind you, this is pretty much the way, although it's larger, the ring nebula would appear if it were turned on its side in an hourglass position, as opposed to looking at it from the vortexes at the top and through the star itself. So this is a ring seen on its side. I'm really pleased with the new settings. It takes a lot of patience to allow the image to generate. There's now color to it. We've seen galaxies. We're making real definite progress with the use of the Revolution 2 system. There may be some minor adjustments, and I may discover some new features, but now we've added color. And that adds a whole new dimension, and we don't seem to have lost anything with regards to the sensitivity and the quality of view. So, I'm going to call this my Carpe Noctem, seize the night moment, and head on inside.